It's quite a unique occasion to have a Lib Dem in the chair, a minister replying and a member interviewing. It must be a first. Can I then invite Ian Swales?
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. I want to begin by reading what a constituent of mine, Jan Laverick, an ME sufferer, wrote to describe her condition. ME is a sudden and extreme muscle weakness to the point of not being able to lift a glass. It is collapsing with exhaustion and not being able to move for hours. It is struggling to sit up long enough to eat a meal that has been placed in your lap. It's tachycardia, seizures, paralysis and blackouts. It's sensitivity to light, sound and touch. Extreme abdominal bloating, nausea, loss of appetite, excruciating stomach cramps. It's daily fevers and sweats, inflammation, horrendous joint, nerve and muscle pain. Imagine suffering from these symptoms only to find that there is little research into the cause or cure, that you might not be taken seriously by your GP or the benefit system. Your condition might even have been dismissed as yuppie flu. I welcome the fact that the Department of Health now accepts myalgic encephalomyelitis, ME, as a genuine medical condition. However, it is clear from talking to sufferers and medical professionals that diagnosis can still pose a problem because ME symptoms are similar to those present in a number of other medical conditions. I recognise that one of the main obstacles to the adequate treatment of ME is the lack of knowledge and consensus about the disease, and will argue that both funding and research must be focused on the biomedical factors involved and not simply managing the psychological symptoms.
Way and congratulate him on securing this important debate, which I know is a subject that is close to his heart and has been raised with me, as it has with him, by a number of constituents who are very concerned. I would like to echo his comments and just point out that I believe that at present no funding is available for biomedical research into causation for ME. And does he agree with me, as I believe he's just said he does, that this is an area that we would wish the government to look at again and encourage them to take very seriously indeed?
I thank the honourable member, and indeed that's right. I'm not sure if no funding is available, but it's certainly the minority of funding, and I think that is something that seriously needs addressing. My goal is to see the Government and Medical Research Council work with ME sufferers and biomedical researchers in order to achieve a proper understanding of the condition's challenges and unjust perceptions of the condition. I was there.
Netbrook.
I do thank my honourable friend and also congratulating him on achieving this debate, which is almost a year since I had a similar debate, and I'm not sure we've moved on since then. Recently, the MRFC has announced £1.5 million, but does he agree with me that there does not appear to be an overall strategy to actually deal with research into ME, that there still seems to be this concentration on the symptoms and not enough attention to the causes?
Ian Swales.
I thank my honourable friend, and yes, I think that is one of the problems, the lack of a strategy that's focused on the latest information. I was delighted to see that and I'm sure it's just a coincidence, that 2 days after this debate was announced, indeed the Medical Research Council did announce £1.5 million for further research into ME. I believe this is an important step, showing that leading medical researchers and the government are finally admitting that the current thinking on ME is inadequate. This is a condition that affects an estimated 250,000 people in the UK. It's not a disease of the elderly. Onset commonly occurs during the 20s to 40s in adults and between 11 and 14 in children, wrecking the lives of so many young people. Studies show that the vast majority of patients never return to their pre-illness level of functioning, and relapses can occur several years after remission. ME is an extremely complex disease for which there is no scientifically proven cause or cure. The main symptom is severe fatigue following almost any mental or physical activity, which does not go away with sleep or rest. This often leads to it being defined under the term chronic fatigue syndrome, or CFS. However, I believe that an important step in changing the misleading perceptions of ME is to recognise CFS as a loose umbrella classification covering a wide range of illnesses where fatigue is a prominent symptom, These may be neurological, malignant, infective, toxic, genetic, or psychiatric in nature. Fatigue is a loosely defined symptom which can occur in some degree in a wide range of conditions. Using this umbrella term has further compounded already significant obstacles in the diagnosis and treatment of ME. It is now identified on the basis of at least 9 different definitions, and major problem lies in the fact that different types of illness are also contained under the CFS umbrella. This makes sound scientific research difficult to conduct, as different illnesses have different biomarkers. So a research group which consists of people with completely different physical and psychological causes for their fatigue or tiredness can only have very limited use and certainly cannot lead to the development of any sound findings on the causes of ME. ME, on the other hand, has a very clear definition. The term myalgic means muscle pain, while encephalomyelitis means inflammation of the brain and spinal cord and represents a clearly defined disease process which has been included in the World Health Organization classification of diseases since 1969. This then poses the obvious question of why research has been mainly focused on psychological symptoms when the very definition of the disease refers to a physiological condition. Fatigue is also a clumsy way of describing a complex range of extremely debilitating symptoms. It's not the sort of fatigue that non-sufferers would recognise. ME, as we heard from my constituent at the start, can be sudden and extreme muscle weakness to the point of not being able to lift a glass. I would ask the Minister what recognition there is in the department that ME is a distinct and different from the much broader term CFS. Equally, in the light of the recent MRC funding announcement, I would urge him to encourage them to focus their research, as treating ME CFS viewed as one homogeneous condition will only encounter the problems I've just outlined. This blurring can also lead to a uniform approach to treatment, which is unreasonable and even dangerous. An indiscriminate blanket approach to treatment was advised by NICE in 2007, no matter what the disease process, infectious agent or psychological condition. Again, the symptom of fatigue gets flagged up and treated in the same way in nearly all cases. This can be ineffective to many and positively dangerous to others, and this lack of recognition of ME specifically happens at every level. Yet I believe it's essential that GPs have the ability to spot ME early and be able to prescribe appropriate tailored advice. I would like to see the government recognise the many differences and subtleties between ME and CFS and would urge the Minister to do the same, as the current treatment guidelines are completely unacceptable. I decided to call for this debate because I feel that this is an issue which has been under-researched and that the lack of understanding and stigma surrounding ME has meant that sufferers have had to live with this condition without recourse to the sort of treatments and research that they deserve. I initially tabled EDM 778 in order to gauge support, and I'm delighted to report that as of yesterday, the 100th colleague signed from all parties have now put their names to it. This shows there is strong feeling in Parliament that significant changes need to be made. There's been a distinct lack of funding into ME research in the last decade. Between 2000 and 2003, not a single penny was spent by the Medical Research Council on researching the condition. Things did improve, peaking with just over 1.3 million being allocated in 2007-08, but that dropped to just 109,000 in 2009-10. I welcome the recent funding announcement. However, with over 80% of the MRC's expenditure on ME research so far has been allocated to psychosocial therapies instead of biomedical studies to prove the existence of a physical cause. That research has continued to pursue a well-trodden path and ignored a vast landscape of other potentially more rewarding areas. I'm concerned to see whether the new MRC funding will focus on this biomedical work. Not only has there been a palpable lack of funding for research, but a past study commissioned by the Department of Health found that the quality of research was poor. For a long-term condition that affects 250,000 people in this country, whereas no known cause, no known cure, and with huge cost to the NHS, the amount of research funding dedicated to it, even with the recent announcement, is pitiful. Misinformation, widespread confusion and ignorance about ME and CFS has resulted in people with entirely different illnesses receiving the same diagnosis. A London sufferer, David Eden, drew my attention to some interesting research that has been taking place in the United States. Recent studies by the Whittemore-Peterson Institute, the National Cancer Institute and the Cleveland Clinic have linked ME with the presence of a newly discovered retrovirus. Blood from 68 of 101 ME patients was found to contain a human gamma-retrovirus, xenotropic murine leukemia virus, XMRV, while only 8 of 218 healthy patients were found to have the same retrovirus. While this result grabbed headlines, most subsequent studies have been less clear, although one other study did support the original findings. It remains uncertain as to whether XMRV is linked to ME and whether it's involved in causation. I would like to encourage the Minister, therefore, to explore other areas of research, such as retroviruses, in order to ascertain once and for all whether they play a part in ME. From the contact I have had with sufferers, there's a constant frustration that the government is failing to fund research into key areas. Another more practical consideration is to do with the recognition of ME by the benefits system. Currently, DLA is assessed by severity of condition, with ME treated like the vast majority of other conditions. Due to the lack of overt clinical findings, a lot of the assessment rests on anecdotal evidence and whether the person's description of their disability is consistent with their daily activities. However, despite the guidance about conducting these interviews, an ME sufferer will only be able to attend such a session on a good day. It's therefore impossible to accurately judge the severity of their condition at the assessment interview. I would argue that there needs to be a more flexible approach to ME. The effects of the condition can wax and wane unpredictably, meaning that often a person's DLA is withdrawn because of a short-term respite in their symptoms. I believe there needs to be more consultation and input from GPs and other medical professionals who are in contact with the individual over a prolonged period of time. Obviously, I understand this isn't directly the Minister's responsibility. However, I would strongly urge him to make representations to the Department of Work and Pensions making this case. Honourable members, Minister, I would like to thank you for listening. To end the current plight of ME sufferers, appropriate and correctly targeted biomedical research must be funded into the causes of the disease. GPs must be properly appraised of the specifics of ME. Sufferers' disability must be recognised in the benefits system with the support of GPs. And ME and CFS must be properly classified, and fatigue must no longer be used as a catch-all symptom. The current situation, which has endured for decades, cannot be allowed to continue. As things stand, 250,000 men, women and children and their families and carers face terrible injustice and neglect, and I call on the government to put this right.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Swales. Mr. Paul Burster.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hancock, and it's a pleasure, as you say, to serve under your chairmanship and the coincidence of speaker and respondent in this debate. I certainly congratulate my honourable friend and the other honourable members who contributed their comments in this debate, and for him for securing it. It isn't the first time the House has debated these matters. My honourable friend, the member for Mid-Poole and North Dorset, has raised these issues, and others besides, including myself, in my time in opposition as well. And for my own part, I certainly have found the support and encouragement I have from my own local ME support group and what they have taught me as being an invaluable part of how an MP gets an insight into a condition they may not personally suffer from. Now, I realise that this is a difficult and controversial subject, and I can understand why feelings really do run very high, and I certainly appreciate the difficult and desperate struggles that people face often to achieve clinical recognition and the relief from the condition and the sense of hope that there is a direction of travel which is about understanding the underlying causes and eventually getting to a cure. What I can say in respect of my honourable friend's comments towards the end of his remarks about benefits is that I will make sure those comments are passed to ministerial colleagues in the Department of Work and Pensions. They're either above my pay grade or certainly outside it, so I won't address that, although I think he makes some important points. The basic challenge is that we don't know with any confidence what causes the distressing symptoms, indeed the condition itself, that my honourable friend has so clearly described. And that's why he's absolutely right, and indeed why the honourable member for Stockton South has also rightly highlighted the need for research in this area. Now, on his point about defining the condition, the fact is that until we have a strong clinical evidence base, we have to keep an open mind about whether this is one condition or a number of conditions with similar symptoms, but with different causes. And so the department does and will continue for the time being to follow the World Health Organization Convention in how we describe and refer to this, and that is to call it CFS/ME. That's the World Health Organization definition. It's not a specific term that the Department of Health has alighted upon and no one else uses. And it's important that that is understood. Now, on our present understanding, this definition best captures the spectrum of symptoms and effects that characterise this illness. As yet, there is no cure or indeed any consistently effective treatment for the condition. And as my honourable friend has rightly said, we don't even have a standard diagnostic test to confirm the condition, with diagnosis only possible by excluding other illnesses with similar symptoms. There is, however, strong international consensus that CFS-ME is a chronic and disabling neurological illness. And I want to stress that this is a neurological illness. It's not a mental health problem, as I know that does cause great concern and indeed arguably offence for many of the sufferers who campaigned vociferously against that suggestion. Although perhaps I can say, in passing, that the strength of many people's reaction to that label is perhaps says a lot about the stigma that still attaches to mental illness itself, and perhaps the attitudes of health professionals towards it. And these are two things that we are attempting to tackle in the mental health strategy that the government has published today. But whilst CFS-ME doesn't have a psychological foundation, that doesn't mean that there are not lessons and insights that we can gain from cognitive behavioural therapy, and that it shouldn't be used as part, where appropriate, of a treatment plan. And as they are for many other long-term health conditions, they are used here too. Now, I know the NICE guideline, which the honourable member has referred to, does include counselling and graded exercise as possible treatment options, and I emphasise that, possible and guideline. Neither of these things are mandated, and it is perfectly possible and should be the nature of the conversation between the clinician and the individual about the appropriate personalised approach to their situation. But these guidelines really are about helping a person to manage their symptoms as much as possible. And in lieu of any clinical cure, it is about social recovery. It's about helping people to manage their symptoms, to be clear about their own goals and how they define their own recovery, rather than prescribing simply a clinical treatment. Now, we know that the treatment in the guidelines helps some patients, but as the honourable gentleman has rightly said, for many it doesn't help at all, and for some they find it offensive. Now, the obvious point, and the one that I'll return to in a moment, is that the doctor needs to work with the patient to find the most appropriate way forward. And that's why personalisation is so much at the heart of our approach to long-term conditions in general, and is clearly critical in this regard too. Now, research has been talked about, and with no cure, research is naturally a source of hope for those with the condition. And my honourable friend has made a very powerful and compelling case for further investment in this area. However, it isn't as simple as the government just saying, we will the end, but we're not clear about the means when it comes to research. It's not a case simply of allocating a research pot to a specific disease type, because down that road lies poor research and not discovery and real change. So what we are doing is protecting the health research budgets overall, and we took that decision from the Centre. The Chancellor in the budget spending review made that decision. But the decisions on how this money is allocated do and rightly should remain with the Medical Research Council and not for a minister sitting behind a desk in Whitehall. And that has to be the case with other funding bodies too. Now, the MRC has nominated CFS-ME as a strategic priority area for several years, and indeed the Council has now set up an expert group specifically to focus on this condition. People actually focusing on this in a way that perhaps has not happened before. Now, the group is made up of leading academics from across the country, as well as representatives from several of the organisations with a direct experience and interest in the condition. And all of them are working together to improve the capacity and opportunities for research in this area. Now, the honourable friend has made reference to what I think he has acknowledged as good news, that the MRC is making up to 1.5 million available to support research into the causes of CFS-ME, and that is to be welcomed. The decision on funding will continue to be made purely on the basis of the quality of the research funding received. But I think what it does do, and it's absolutely critical in any area where we need more research to take place, is it sends a very clear signal that the money is there, that there is a willingness to commit funds to research. And now the challenge, the gauntlet, if you like, is thrown down to the research community to rise to that challenge, to make sure that there are enough bids of sufficient quality to draw down that funding. So I can tell my honourable friend that this new funding and the funding call that underpins it will focus on 6 priority areas identified by the expert group: autonomic dysfunction, cognitive symptoms, fatigue, immune problems and pain management, and sleep disorders. And I will make sure that the MRC and other research bodies have sight of the debate and the additional points that have been made about biomedical research, so that that is taken into account by the expert groups as well. The call will also seek to build up research capacity, because one of the challenges has been attracting more researchers into the field. But the expert group itself can only achieve so much. And if I can be perhaps a little blunt, there has been a history of fractiousness and fragmentation between different groups with an interest in this area. It's easy often to agree on what we don't like, but it's harder sometimes to agree on what the course of action and what the common ground actually is from which we can build and start to change things. So I can totally understand the heightened emotions that often are articulated by our constituents who suffer from this condition. I really can. I've had people in my own surgery and I speak to them about it. But the fact is, we simply won't achieve anything if organisations don't work together and engage with one another and find that common ground and build the alliances. Now, all patients groups need to look outwards and to be positive about how they can work with the NHS, with the department, with medical researchers and with each other to influence change. And frankly, one of the big challenges is to get more researchers interested in this area of work. And I think we're in danger, sometimes, of shooting ourselves in the foot by failing to have a united front in this area. Now, everyone with a stake in this area has an interest in ensuring a constructive and supportive environment exists for research. I think that's key. And I think divisions and discord won't accelerate the pace of change. And that's why I hope the all-party parliamentary group, as it's reconstituted, can play its part in providing us that challenge and drive us forward. Now, my honourable friend mentioned XMRV retrovirus, and all I can say is really underline the points that he himself has made. The area is one where research is not conclusive. Further research needs to be done, and further research is being pursued to establish whether or not there is a real link. But certainly there is no robust evidence to suggest there is at this time. Now, research can provide hope for the future, but I know we need to do more in the present to improve the care of people with the condition. And the fact is, the NHS doesn't always get it right for people with long-term conditions in general, let alone with ME, CFS. And the problems that many face are consistent with other conditions as well. The issues of care being fragmented rather than integrated, of people struggling to be referred to specialists in a timely and appropriate way, and perhaps most important of all, the sense of health professionals seeing conditions rather than the person actually in front of them. And in a way, this debate is about how we, whilst it's about how we describe CFS-ME, it taps into some basic ideas that all too often the label does wind up mattering more than the person. And because they decide how we're treated and what the service is that you're referred to, and frankly they shouldn't. That shouldn't be the most important determinant. And we want to change this. We want the patient and the doctor to work in partnership in the consulting room, meeting, if you like, as two experts, one on the person and one on the appropriate ways to support and treat them. Now, the greater use of personalisation, Mr. Hancock, and care planning really can play, I think, a part in all of this. And it has to be, and it is, in this government's intentions, an explicit part of our plans for the NHS. But it goes deeper than this. This is really about patients being given the power of self-determination, of that idea of no decision about me without me being a governing principle of the NHS, being asked to set their own personal goals and work together with professionals to achieve them. Now, everyone's different, and we need to make sure that the care they receive reflects that. Now, I want to say something about commissioning. Although the Honourable Member didn't mention it specifically, I think it's important that we touch on that. Because to achieve these changes, to get the right services and the right specialists, we have to make sure that we have support available. And I know from my own constituency that there's excellent work that's been done on specialist CFS ME clinics to integrate care for patients. But there is a patchiness around the country, compromising the quality of the treatment and reducing the options available to people. And that's why we need to improve commissioning, and I think GP consortia can help us involve patients much more in how local services are shaped. So let me stress, the future of the NHS is local, not national. It's about local NHS and local GP consortia working with local patients groups and making decisions based on a clear understanding of their needs and local needs. So to commission effectively, GPs must understand the needs of patients with long-term conditions. And this is an area where I hope the Neurological Alliance can play an important part. The Neurological Alliance nationally and regionally has the networks of support that can make a huge difference in terms of levering change in the commissioning of neurological services. And I would urge those groups with an interest in ME, with an interest in CFS ME, to actually engage with the Neurological Alliance and use it and work through it and form their connections with it as a way of shaping and changing services going forward. So in conclusion, Mr. Hancock, I think there are some real opportunities and a real chance to address some of the frustrations and misery that people with this condition experience. And the message from me and from the Department of Health is that there is an open invitation for representatives and representative groups to get involved in shaping the future of the NHS. We want the Neurological Alliance to be a key source of advice and support for GP consortia and health and wellbeing boards at the local level. And I'm sure the new NHS Commissioning Board will also be keen to build links with the Alliance in forming national policy too. So the urgency is there, and this additional commitment to make sure that we drive this whole area of long-term conditions to the top of the agenda is part of this government's ambition. I thank my honourable friend for raising these matters today, and we will continue to work together to make sure we improve the lot of his constituents and constituents of all members in this House.